Thank you, Kami. And what a powerful video from Tim. We're really grateful to be working with him on this mission. And so we wanted to kick off the conversation with the panel on what we mean by bridge building. What are the bridges we're seeking to build? And we have a stellar panel here today. Joining us, we have Eboo Patel, the president of Interfaith America. We have Mónica Guzmán, who's an author and senior fellow at Braver Angels, and Baratunde Thurston, who's a host of the PBS series America Outdoors and host of the podcast How to Citizen. Let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. So, Eboo, I'm going to start with you. Just as a way of introducing the work that you do, and I'll ask this question with all of the panelists, what is it about this moment in America that shapes the work that you do?
Yeah, so first of all, this is like super odd. I feel very intimate with this side of the room, and like, you guys are like the other political party or something. Like in some ways, it feels like a metaphor for things. But look, I've been leading an organization for 20 plus years called Interfaith America. And the big idea of Interfaith America is that in the most religiously diverse nation in human history, the most religiously devout nation in the Western Hemisphere, the world's first attempt at religiously diverse democracy, faith better be a bridge of cooperation, not a barrier of division. And you have to work hard for that to be the case, right? You can't just you can't have neutral territory because that can easily be filled by bad actors, right? And so how do you positively and proactively engage that dimension of identity to make sure that it is a source of inspiration, it's playing a healthy role in the nation, et cetera, et cetera? So part of what I want to do here is to say that I actually think Hollywood does a really good job at telling stories of cooperation. There are a lot of bright spots, right? And I want to pay attention to what those bright spots are and say, you have told grand narratives of how people can live together. Now, you've also told other stories too, right? But I want to give you as an example from my family of like a story of social cohesion that was super relevant to my Indian Muslim Ismaili kids. Okay, I've shown my kids like we have this game where it's movie night, and if you don't like the movie, I'll pay you $10, right? That's what you do with teenagers, right? I'll pay you $10, but we're gonna watch the Mandela movie. We're gonna watch Invictus. We're gonna watch Bend It Like Beckham. We're gonna watch all these movies about what it means to be part of minority identity and to emerge and be yourself. You know what the single most relevant movie I've ever shown my kids is
The Bus Came.
Oh, that must be that comment. All right, go ahead.
The single most relevant, my kids said that the single most relevant movie about people from different identities getting along with each other was The Breakfast Club. So I want you to just think about that for a second, right? Like my kids are, like I said, brown, Indian, Muslim kids growing up in post 9/11 America, have been called all kinds of ugly names in the playground for a lot of their lives, right? And this film about a bunch of suburban white folks that radically altered my life in the 1980s when I saw it was highly relevant to how they saw their identity working in a group. And I actually think this is the genius of Hollywood. Like, John Hughes was making a diversity movie. And the diversity he was talking about was the nerd, the jock, the burnout, the prom queen, the weirdo. And part of what an audience does with a good story is transposes one world to another world, right? And so Ruth Simmons, the former president of Brown University, who's a scholar of French literature, was like, I came into my Black identity by reading 16th century French texts, because that group of people was seeking to emerge as a civilization and as a discrete community. And so was I. And that's what a good story does, right? So a huge part of what I want to do is to say, do your work really well, right? I mean, I've seen The Breakfast Club a dozen times, and the dialogue surprises me every time. I'm like, oh my gosh, he just said that? But I know he did because I've seen it 11 other times. And the movie is so good that it's still surprising, right? So there's a lot of these examples. The end of Game of Thrones. Daenerys Targaryen doesn't get the throne, right? Like, honestly, if what you're good at the whole time is burning things down, do you think that when you step on the throne, you're going to be good at peace and prosperity? Who gets the throne? Bran the Broken. What is Bran's superpower? He carries the world's stories in his head. That is a genius ending. That is a genius ending, right? So you do this really well. The question is, how do you do more of what you do really well?
Well said. Monica, let's go to you.
Yeah, seriously.
What I love about, first of all, the work that all of you are doing is in different ways you're stitching together new stories of us. And Monica, you're doing this in many ways, including with your recent book. Tell us just a little bit more about the work you're doing and what is it about this moment that inspires you?
So I'm at Braver Angels, which is a very large grassroots, nonpartisan nonprofit really focusing on depolarizing America. And we have all kinds of amazing programs. I'll shout out my colleague April Lawson, who started the Braver Angels debates. These incredible debates on the most contentious, divisive issues you can imagine. But it's not about picking a winner. It's about engaging in a collective search for truth. When I attended a debate might have been April 2020, about the COVID lockdowns. And I heard from people for whom the lockdowns were so concerning because of the worries about their livelihoods. Oh my gosh, it was just perspectives I didn't hear in true blue Seattle, and among sort of, my circles and my set. So we do all kinds of programs at Braver Angels that are not about changing people's minds on the issues, but changing people's minds on each other. Because if we can't trust each other, we cannot engage in a collective search for truth. If we continue to have our separate realities and just try to insist them to each other, we know the research tells us, our own observation and intuition tells us, that only entrenches everybody. So I think the future of a healthy society relies on building trust. Now, the thing that brought me to this work is a lot more personal. So I'm a Mexican immigrant, and I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants. And we became citizens in the year 2000, and I remember coming home and plopping my backpack down in the office downstairs and looking up and seeing a Bush Cheney sign over my mom's desk. And I was like, they're Republicans. And I just hadn't even thought of that. I just figured, of course, they'd be liberal Democrats like me. It just seems so obvious. It seems the right way to think or whatever. And so thus ensued much drama over the dinner table, over any table, in the car on the way home from seeing the Michael Moore documentary, Bowling for Columbine. I had to open the windows just because the hot air needed to just get out. It's the front seat versus the back seat, and yelling. And then we got home, and it was even more and more and more. So I couldn't come home and rely on being affirmed in my beliefs. When I went to a liberal arts college, Bowdoin College in Maine, I later learned that my dad felt like he'd failed because he let me go to a place that he thought totally brainwashed me. And his conservative beliefs to him feel so right. I'll never forget the night of the 2016 election when the result was clear. I called one of the people I love most in the world, and my mother. And I called her and I told her how broken I thought everything was that night. And I told her, democracy is broken because this candidate that I just cannot see my way to this man has done this. And she, to her credit, I have learned since that she was so happy that night. She was so happy. And her daughter calls her, and all she wants to tell me is how she feels, but she doesn't. She waits and she listens because she can tell I'm in pain. I'm hurting. And she listens and she listens. And then she tells me about growing up in Mexico and how one party controlled everything until the year 2000. Every election was rigged and everyone knew it. It was a completely open secret and there was nothing you could do. And then she told me how, she'd been voting in American elections really proudly for Republican candidates. And then here comes the 2016 campaign. And all she's hearing from the media is that Hillary's going to coast to a victory. Why should she vote? Why should she bother to vote? but she did bother to vote. And her candidate won. And she told me, democracy's not broken, Monica. The way I see it, democracy works. So in that context, in my personal life, there have been so many of those moments that I call I never thought of it that way moments, where some insight crosses that chasm between your experience and someone else's. And it can be a hard thing to put yourself in that position where that can happen, but it can be a real gift. So, I started to hear people in Seattle speak with contempt. Tim just talked about that. Real deep contempt for people who had voted for Trump. Again, Seattle, like many communities, super majority area, either you're very blue or you're very red anymore in this country. Everybody's sorting into like-minded groups. And I started to take it really personally because they're talking about my parents. And these things are just not true. So that led me to Braver Angels. It led me to the book. It led me to this work that I agree with you, Stephen. I mean, polarization, toxic hyperpolarization, the contempt is the problem that eats all other problems. I've talked to so many elected officials about this, and they can't govern. They can't get their work done in this climate, The games that we play, and the media too. I was a journalist for many years, and I had to learn, I was actually really good for a period of time at getting my article about some trend to the top of Google Trends to get the most page views. I knew how to hack people's psychology to get them to click. And that's what you have to do. It seems like that's what you have to do to win, but it is killing us. So we have to find some other way. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure there'll be more to say.
Thank you. And I think one thing that I took away from your story, Monica, is how important it is that we're humanizing Americans across these divides, and we're closing, I think what you've talked about is the perception versus reality gap.
Yeah, exactly.
And let's go to Baratunde. Tell us a little bit, you do this through both of your shows, and tell us a little bit more about those and what moved you to do those shows.
I'm moved right now by this room. I never heard Tim Travers speak like that before. That was cool. Yeah, really, really moved. And we agree on a lot. I'm moved by your story tremendously. Thank you for everything you're doing. I've known Monica since she was a baby journalist, before she was hacking minds. And she was a good person once. It's a shame how far you've fallen.
I know.
And Eboo, I was with you right until you praised the end of Game of Thrones. We'll never. Some lines you can't cross. So we are too far apart, my brother. I don't know how much they paid you to say that. That was so amazing. You spun it so good. Oh, man. I'm moved because I think about the things that I try to do with the powers that I feel I have, which is to use words and string them together and tell tales as weaving together a better story of us. And that's been a long journey for me through a lot of tech things, through a childhood in DC during the 80s, through my father's murder, through my mother's superhuman strength to persist and move me and my older sister forward, through her being a computer programmer in a world not designed for that, not for her, and she did it. I think about it in my journey. My mom, when I was 12, she gave me this homework assignment. She always gave me extra homework to help me get ahead. You have to work twice as hard to get half as far because racism, which is bad math. Like when I understood math, I'm like, I'm working 4x for the same outcome. That's really inefficient, Mom. We've got to change everybody else. That's too much work for me. But in the meantime, for the people in the back, I love you. I also love these chandeliers. Nothing says we a private university.
Can you tell he worked for the Onion?
9 extra chandeliers. 1 is enough, bro. Like, we're good. My mom loaded me up with extra work. Boy Scouts and hiking and biking and after-school programs to get ahead, not to catch up, to get ahead. And one of the early assignments she gave me, which was preposterous, because I was at most 12 years old, She said, I want you to come up with the system we live under after democracy and capitalism have failed.
Wow.
That's heavy, man. I had just started like sweating with my armpits, as because of hormones. And that did not help. That did not help the sweat situation. But it's been this question that's been on my mind, and I've pursued it through comedy, through stand-up for a decade, through America's finest news source, The Onion, through The Daily Show with Trevor. I've pursued it through tech, and if we're just connected, well, you know how wonderfully that worked out. I've pursued it through some political activism and knocking on doors and hashtagging and shouting and writing op-eds and the whole thing. And where it landed heaviest and most resonantly is in this podcast, is How to Citizen work, where we take citizen as a verb. And we have these 4 principles of what that means. It's not about your naturalization or immigration status, not about where your parents had sex or where you came out of womb. None of those are our choices. It's the verb which invites us to do something, to participate, to act. And so citizen as a verb means we participate. It means we commit to the collective, not just our individual selves. It means we invest in relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the planet around us. And it means we understand power. And that is not a bad thing. Power is just, as Eric Liu taught us in our very early episode, the way you get people to do stuff you want them to do. Babies, very powerful, very, very powerful, because all y'all got jobs. And you don't need to have them. The kids should work, but you work for them because babies are powerful. So a lot of baby fans in the room. That's cool. Is there a strong lobby? We built this show based on frustration with a story that we're failures. The news is focused on disasters and crashes and discord and dissolution and all of that, and that just wasn't aligning with the truth that I also knew from the people I actually experienced, that yes, there's a lot of things on fire, and there's people putting fires out. More importantly, there's people constructing fire-resistant structures. There's people building whole societies nowhere near where fire happens all the time. And we should take lessons from all of that. And then my racial analysis also gets angry, because we talk real proudly, about American democracy. Like it's always been this beautiful thing for everybody. And it hasn't. And we need to stop, because we lose credibility when we talk like that, because people see through it, like a baby will, like a child will. So that show has been 4 seasons of dozens of stories of people in their economic lives, in their political lives, in their church lives, who have found different ways to exhibit these values and live together. How do we just live together with all this difference? The democracy, even that word is like very academic. A lot of people don't care about democracy. They actively don't. In this country, we care about freedom a lot because we've been hit over the head with it so much as like the prime thing, and we interpret it individualistically. But we all ultimately have to live together, because we can't do this thing on our own. So that's been very animating. The America Outdoors show has been an embodied way of experiencing that. People who've connected to nature, reconnected to this important part of ourselves, to conceive of ourselves as more than just individuals, but also more than just the human species, is essential to our collective survival. And so we need a tale that weaves together. I think the last thing that's on my mind right now is death.
Oh.
I know, it's fun. Comedy. So democracy is in crisis. Democracy is dying. These are headlines, and it's true. A lot of it is true. And we need to internalize that and accept that some of what it was born to do in this form never served all of us to begin with. And it's okay to let that part die. And we should acknowledge the death. We should mourn the death as we celebrate the new life that's also happening. There's so much beautiful experiments and communities and businesses who are doing this thing really, really well. And like Tim said, we're speaking the same damn language. We're all speaking the same language here. That's the story we need to be hearing. So we got to have a funeral while we have a baby shower.
Right. That's one heck of a task. that is a perfect segue to a question I want to pose to you, Eboo, which is, as we, with Bridge Entertainment Labs, we're partnering with producers and writers and studio executives on elevating these new stories of us. And one of the most common questions that comes up is, what do you really mean by bridging divides? Now, full disclosure, Eboo and I go really far back. When I was talking about the many mentors in the room, Eboo is one of them who's been with me on this journey from the very beginning, since I was in college. And over those years, there's no one who I've met who's thought more about what we truly mean by bridging divides through all of your books, and what we don't mean by bridging divides. So in your view, Eboo, could you just share how you think about bridging divides, and how do you build the strongest bridges possible?
So let me tell two stories here. By the way, I love listening to the two of you. So it's awesome. Let me tell two stories here. One is a story that I read in the New York Times, I don't know, 10 years ago. I happened to be, at the time I was reading it, happened to be in Bend, Oregon, and there were fires burning on like 3 sides. Okay, you wake up in the morning and it's hard to breathe. I read the story in the New York Times that opens with the line, when there is a fire on the Catholic side of the city of Mostar, in the city of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Muslim fire department does not respond. When there is a fire on the Muslim side of Mostar, the Catholic fire department does not respond. And it goes on to describe, in this extremely cool, kind of standoffish, journalistic way, a city that is not in hot conflict, that is totally divided along ethno-religious lines. So Catholics and Muslims go to the same schools. Catholics go from 7 a.m. to noon. Muslims go from 1 to 6. Different nightclubs, different soccer teams, different garbage collection companies. And so I think one of the interesting things to think about when you think about American division is there's 8 billion people in the world. So what are we comparing ourselves to? And I don't know if heaven is the best reference point. I'm totally serious, right? Like, I'm not sure if we should begin from this is perfect and let's measure the distance we are from that. I don't think we live in John Locke's world. I think we live in Thomas Hobbes's world, right? So if you begin from chaos and ask the question, what does civilized look like, and where are we on that continuum or on that journey? I think that's a different kind of question. By the way, this is not a statement of complacency, right? It's actually a narrative. The narrative is, if you tell a story of progress, people will feel inspired to take the next few steps. If you tell a story of things that are terrible, people will just keep telling terrible stories, right? So I just want people to consider that. I want people to consider, like, we live in a world of 8 billion people. And America is the place that, in a time of war, we resettle both sides of the conflict, and they almost never recreate the war here. And that is a stunning fact of our nation. When Indians and Pakistanis, who are taught to hate each other literally from birth, move to Chicago, they move to the same 12 square blocks on West Devon Street. That's a story to tell. That's a story to tell, right? So I just think, by the way, this is not about complacency. It's about trajectory. It's about waking up and saying, thank you to the people who went before me, who built a place where I'm not at war with the people who pray differently than me in this country. I can actually architect something a little bit better. So now let me tell you so that's kind of a grand story, right? Let me put a little postcard moment in that. So I am speaking at Baylor University, I don't know, this is like 6-8 years ago, and I fly into Dallas, I get a rental car, I'm driving to Waco, and I stop at this roadside barbecue joint on the way. And you walk in, this is not a hipster roadside barbecue joint, okay? like dudes in overalls, Fox News on, like every head turns to stare. Okay, we're like 20 miles outside of Waco. I'm like, holy shit, like Ted Nugent times 50 is in this place, okay? And
Too much Nugent.
that's a lot of Nugent, a lot of Nugent. And I go to like the place to order, and all the food is out, but it's not fully labeled. Like, it's not like Chicago where it's like no peanuts or walnuts or tree nuts or anything that's been within 100 feet. It's like, brisket, baked chicken, mac and cheese, right? I'm looking, I'm Muslim, I don't eat pork, right? People like throw pig in everything these days, right? I don't know what I can eat. So I'm like, I'll have the baked chicken and the cornbread. I know that's safe. I have no idea what's in the collard greens. I have no idea what's in the mac and cheese. And I'm like trying to like look and figure it out. And there's a line of people behind me, and they probably didn't like me when I walked in. And one guy's like, hey, brown guy, hurry up. And I'm like looking, right? And the woman on the other side of the counter, who like clearly part of this broader community, looks at me and says, you can have the mac and cheese and the yams. I looked at her, I'm like, thank you. And she's like, everybody's got to eat. I'm like, everybody's got to eat. And that's all she said. She just knew, like something is up. I can't pronounce whatever it is that this guy is, but I know what he's looking for. I can tell because he didn't order the pork chops, right, or whatever. So that's a moment. That's bridging a divide. And she did it in her way. She did it in her way.
This is a roadside barbecue on the way to Waco.
Yeah.
They are known for putting pork in their yams, bro.
She was messing me up. She was messing me up. She was so sincere while she was doing it.
But that's a narrative shift we need, right? To see the best in people and not always the worst, right? And an aspirational narrative about how we're trying to create the most diverse democracy ever in human history. That's a story that needs to be in the zeitgeist of America. But it's hard, as you've talked about, Mónica, because there is this perception gap. And I think you have this great line that people who are underrepresented in your life are going to be overrepresented in your imagination. Say a little bit more about that.
It's true. I mean, we like to think that all of this mess is about stuff going on out there. And what we have a hard time acknowledging is that a lot of it is up here. What we do, people are the only agents in this world. And what we do, our actions are based on our beliefs. And our beliefs are up here. And some of them we form consciously, and some of them we form unconsciously. And a lot of our opinions have really, really deep roots. And what the social research has shown us, like perception gap and everything else, is constant exaggeration and misperception across the divide all the time. And this despite the fact that we're awash in information. How does that compute, right? But as I think of it, how can we pretend to be informed when we are not informed about each other? How is it that our perspectives are so unclear to us? And we know how. It's because we're so sorted into like-minded groups. We other with abandon when we're afraid and uncertain, and then we silo ourselves with the stories that we tell each other about the people around us and our role in the world. So it's an inconvenient truth that in this divided time with so many iterations of a very vicious cycle where we are judging each other more while we engage each other less. Right? Judging each other more, engaging each other less. And what happens, two things start to build in the gap there. One is certainty. So we know that when we are anxious and things are turbulent, uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable and difficult to hold on to. So you ask a question you're confounded by. How could they vote for so-and-so, right? And then you find a thought piece on the internet, and it sounds very confident with a lot of great statistics. And so you believe it, and what you're doing is you're manufacturing certainty. There's a lot of open questions there, but you've decided to close that gap in your mind between what you know and what you could learn, and just close it and say, I know everything I need to know about why those people think that way. That's it. So all those questions that could have arisen are killed before you get the chance to ask them. Now, the other thing that gets in the way is fear. You can't wonder about something you think is out to get you. And there's absolutely no doubt that there are some people so consumed by hate, they are worth fearing. But from what we can tell, it is far fewer than we think. Fear itself is a superpower because it keeps us safe. It helps us survive. But when your brain goes to fear mode, it can't be creative. It can't be collaborative. It can't reflect, right? So this vicious cycle, judge more, engage less. What happens? Some weird projection of the world and the people in it that isn't even real starts to happen. And unfortunately, it tends to follow the pattern of our exposure. I mean, I think of the woman in the roadside bar. Somehow she knew enough.
Yeah.
She knew enough about people not like her to guess at what was going on, right? But the longer we do this and we justify it, they will only harm me. They will hurt me, or they are evil, or they are crazy, or they are stupid. The longer we do that, the less that moments like that can even happen. So that's it. The truth that whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination means we got to do something to hack into that pattern for ourselves. We've got to start, and to me, the first step is question those assumptions. You know, when you feel that judgment come up about a whole group of people, somebody you've never talked to, I know everything about, what? Where did you get that idea? Something about the way they look or what they're wearing, some signal about their politics. You do not know that person, right? And so we've got to realize what we don't know and welcome that uncertainty. And I like your analogy about, have a funeral for some things and a baby shower for another. It's like, let's start noticing and seeing our assumptions so we have the chance to question them for ourselves, because it's all about what's going on in here.
Right. Well said. Well, Baratunde, one thought I've been thinking a lot about coming into this panel is how we can model what healthy conflict looks like in popular culture. And we've had some examples of that, as Eboo was mentioning. But I know this is a topic you talk about on your podcast, and the importance of humanizing different experiences in America. And you find, I think, a really creative way of doing it on your PBS show as well. So how can we model healthy conflict in America in a very polarized time, and then how do we close the gap, as you have done, to bring that to the surface in popular culture?
I think some of the ways, this is non-comprehensive, of course. Your whole book is about this. We ask questions versus making statements, and ask about feelings versus thoughts. Feelings are less deniable. They're a little less charged. What do I think is usually a verbal retweet. It's what I last read. My thoughts I absorbed temporarily from the most recent smart thing I heard. What do I feel? Oh, now you're getting into the gunky, messy parts. That's very personal. Good. Now we're having a relationship, even though it may be temporary. So inquiring and being involved in feelings is a way to do that. Not talking at all. And I don't mean not having any relationship. I mean not centering it on words. We're also a verbose society. Laws and letters and documents, and not everybody reads and everybody writes and everybody's articulate, but we have some combination of experience that gives us all the right to life. We eat, let's eat together. We play, let's play together. We go on a hike, let's go on a hike together. The beauty of the America Outdoors show is a show called America Outdoors. Like, oh, it's an outdoor show. Gotcha. It's a people show. It takes place in the outdoors. But mostly we just focus on people who have a relationship to the outdoors. And I've been able to have very human connections with those people who I had a lot of judgment about and little experience with, because I don't live where they live. I didn't grow up in their skin and with their DNA and with their family history and all that stuff. But I remember being in the Chesapeake Bay, and I remember being in Idaho, and I had a similar experience. In the Chesapeake Bay, I was in the Trumpiest town in the country at the time, per capita rates of voting for Trump, a town called Tangier Island. The mayor, super right-wing dude, but that's not why I was there. I was there for crab. I was there to learn, and I was there because his town is sinking. because the water is rising so rapidly that he had to exhume his own ancestor and put him in his backyard. We walked along the shoreline and there were headstones. That ain't right. And he knows that ain't right. And he won't use the word climate change, but he knows the water is real and it's rising, and he wants federal funds to help mitigate whatever's going on here. And I'm not there to wag my finger and say, I told you something. This man is near tears. I never had to dig someone out of the ground. I put people in the ground. And that's sad enough. That's supposed to be a one-way journey. So that is a really hard thing for him to share. At the same time, I'm in Idaho, what we call Idaho, with the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, the salmon people. We're supposed to do this salmon hunt. It's a ritual they do every year. And this year, they decided not to do it. We showed up and like, we're not doing a salmon hunt. We're like, we're with TV, so you better hunt some salmon. You know how this game works. We spent money. We got cameras and people we answer to, and the American people want to see some salmon. And they're like, we're not going to do that. PBS does not show up like that. I'm being very facetious. Thanks to viewers like you, we were able to respectfully show up into every community in this country. But there was a sense of sadness and mourning on their part. They see the salmon as their brethren. The salmon have allowed them to survive, and they thought a way that they could help them survive in return was to not take them from their boiling homes. And so they did a mock salmon hunt. And I watched these parents and their kids pretend to hunt salmon and train their little girls. If there were a fish here, what would you do? Whew. And they had tears in their eyes, and the tears that they had were the same as the tears of that mayor in Tangier Island. Both feeling the same thing, loss. And feelings that are shared can be a bridge across which we connect and see ourselves as the same. If even for a moment, sometimes all you need is a moment. You got a moment. That was a powerful moment. And we need to build momentum on moments like that and bypass and hack, some of the lies, the profitable, algorithmically accelerated lies that want to reflect some uglier version of ourselves back to them.
Right. I mean, those algorithms and the money behind them, they can call in our darkest impulses or our better angels. And I know for many of us in this room, we're pushing and pushing against this multi-billion-dollar industry. But then there are those moments. And if you have enough of them and you can stitch that together into a story, it becomes a narrative. And I think that's the power of what we're trying to do here.
Well, we are doing it.
We are doing, exactly.
We're already doing it.
Absolutely.
That's a loving adjustment.
Yeah.
But that is part of what we also carry is sometimes, I'll speak for myself, what I often carry is like pre-defeat.
Right.
No. The mirror is broken, not me, not us. The people are fine. The story needs to be rewritten.
As we think about that mirror, I think one of the narrative shifts that we're seeking, and Eboo, you've done a lot of thinking about this, is the dual movements afoot right now in America for justice and the movement for pluralism. And we have leaders of both of those movements in this room here today. How can we tell a story that brings harmony to those dual goals? We can't have one without the other, but you've just done a lot of thinking on this and would love the audience to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so look, I think the only way to have a diverse democracy is to be able to disagree on some fundamental things and work together on other fundamental things, right? And that's just a glass half full, and it's just the deal, right? So, I mean, I realized this. I had, I think, a set of moments kind of like you did with your parents, Mónica. But I realized this. I'm in D.C. This is January 2000, late January, early February 2017, and I'm at this hotel with all of these young people, and from like different church groups. I know that because the T-shirts that they're wearing, and they're like all having breakfast, and their Bibles are out and stuff, and I kind of discern. I'm like, you guys are Catholics, evangelicals, and Mormons. Like I'm seeing the T-shirts, right? and I have no idea what's going on. And I finally ask one of these tables at breakfast one morning in this hotel, and they look at me as if like I've, like my ears are 10 feet tall. Like, you don't know what's going on? The biggest moment of our lifetime, a sitting vice president is speaking at the March for Life. And somebody was like, this is one of the great social justice movements of our time.
It is.
Now, I'm from a world in which people talk about justice when it comes to abortion, always on the other side. And I'm encountering a world in which they're using the word justice in association with a different identity. Welcome to diversity. Diversity is not just the differences you like. Do they not have a right to their identity?
Did they spell it different though?
They're justice.
Justice? Like a Y?
People have a right to their identity. Now, there are lines, there are parameters, shouldn't, like, there are, I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale, but you have a right to be Catholic. You have a right to be an evangelical. You have a right to be LDS. You have a right to believe a set of things. You have a right to speak in that cause. You have a right to frame it the way you want to. Right? You have a right to your identity. So I think a really interesting question is, how do you have a diverse democracy when people have different definitions of justice? So one of my favorite movements, I know, I don't know what I just did to this room, but I did something.
Really interesting.
So, but
You said KKK bake sale. I think that just stunned a lot of it, It's like, wait, where did my brownies come from? I never asked. Now I gotta ask. A whole supply chain challenge.
there's a moment in Angels in America. People are Angels in America fans in here. So it's, best thing I've seen on the American stage, and there's lots of great plays out there, right? But there's a moment in Angels in America towards the beginning when one of the gay characters, I think it's Pryor, it's either Lewis or Pryor, runs into one of the LDS Mormon characters. I think it's Joe. And they're having a moment, and Lewis says they're having a conversation, and Lewis says to Joe, I'm gay, I think he's kind of hoping, Joe's kind of hunky. I think he's kind of hoping, right? That's the way that Tony Kushner sets it up. And Joe says to Lewis, I'm Mormon, we don't believe in gay people. And Lewis says to Joe, I don't believe in Mormons. And the reason it's such a brilliant scene is because Tony Kushner is saying, you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
You can't just not believe in the person in front of you.
Yeah.
They're there. So how are you going to relate?
Yeah, I want to add something to that real quick, because I get this question a lot, and it's a heavy question. How do you bridge a divide with someone who doesn't think you should exist, right? And that's a question asked on behalf of or from people who occupy identities that they'll hear things like that. And I think just observing human nature over time, one thing I've realized is that we think we need to make an argument all the time, that we need to have our talking points ready and pew, 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 and that's the way we justify ourselves. But I think the best way to argue against someone who doesn't believe you should exist is to continue to exist in their presence.
Yeah.
And that can be so powerful. I remember Calvin University, which is a Christian school in the Midwest. There's a student there who's an international student from Africa, and she had gone to a wedding recently, and she ended up sitting next to an older white man who, for whatever reason, started talking about his views on immigration, and definitely, more conservative, but talks about her and people who look like her in very condescending ways. You people are ruining everything, that kind of thing. So she just kind of sits there. And, she told me she didn't know what to do, but she knew, I'm at a wedding. I'm not here for this. So she gets up, she dances. She just tries to have a good time. She mostly forgets about it. And the man comes up to her and apologizes. I am so sorry. I was completely out of line and so disrespectful. I'm not used. There was just something. I don't know a lot of people. And then, he's trying to kind of stammer. And it made me think about how when we have conversations, we think there's one conversation. I'm having a conversation with you. But I'm also having a conversation with myself.
Yeah.
And you're having a conversation with yourself, right? So to continue to exist in each other's presence, you can spark a conversation that you are not privy to. But that's how transformations can happen. And it's so powerful, and that's where a lot of these moments that really transcend ultimately come from. It's not that you made this incredible argument, mic drop moment like on social media, which never works, but you only get likes from the people who agree with you, okay? It's something far more profound. It's how to human. We can human with each other. Sometimes that's enough.
You should jump in on this. I know we have 1 more minute left, but please jump in. And then also just would love to hear your thoughts on how we can sort of elevate this conversation into storylines, into characters.
Yeah.
I know you've been in those rooms, so kind of stitch that together.
Oh, that's it? Cool.
What, 30 seconds?
1 minute.
30 seconds.
I work for us all. So on the same team, Team Human.
Yeah.
I was thinking about another thing I learned in the course of our learning with the How to Citizen work, which is itself is a storytelling effort to find people doing this thing, this way of living together and negotiating power and practicing democracy, small d. And it has to do with the questions and how we interpret the answers. We have a very binary way of saying, are you for babies or are you against babies? And that's a stupid question. We're all against babies. They don't work. I've been very clear about this. They are freeloaders. Right? We could all get on the same page about that. But we spoke with Audrey Tang, digital minister of Taiwan, and a revolutionary who became a government functionary and using new tools and processes, ways that we have the conversation with each other to get at different answers. And so if you just add a how much to the query, what do you think about X and how important is it to you? This quadratic voting concept, this polis polling software where you try to find consensus, not just binary A-B sorting, then you might find out, often you do find out, that the person who is opposed to the thing you care about is weakly opposed. And the thing that you're opposed to, you're weakly opposed. And if you have limited amounts of equity to cast, dots in a design voting challenge or actual votes in a quadratic voting challenge, I'm willing to have you win on that thing. Turns out it's actually that important to me. This thing over here, though, is super. And when you have a relationship with someone, your mom did this intuitively. You both wanted to do, and she heard the weight of your vote in that moment, and she didn't cash her thing in.
Right.
She held her vote back. I'm not going to express this right now. That would add more. She's carrying a lot. That subtlety we need in the stories. Because we're getting these stories that are quite often heavy-handed and ham-fisted and overly simplistic, and there's a lot of executives out there who think very little of us as humans. And the beautiful thing about us is we're all just us. We're just fractal versions of the bigger thing that we're a part of. And so if anyone in this room is feeling doubtful or judging with ignorance, then so is that executive who's greenlighting things.
Yeah.
But the fear is gonna kill. Okay, so we all gotta just give ourselves a little grace. Let our shoulders down. Take a breath. Recognize we ain't perfect. We're all on this journey together. We're just hurtling through space and time. And try again. And to your point, Monica, I wanna add I think this helps us try to get back to the storytelling. Yes, and. Being in the presence of people who have atrociously negative attitudes about any one of our existences is expensive.
And can be very unsafe.
Yes.
Very unsafe.
Very expensive. What is more affordable is media. This book can represent me, and I don't have to be in the room. This TV series, this documentary series, this film can tell the story while I am at home in my cozy little bed, not having to bear the weight of Captain Ignoramus here. because maybe I've already dealt with a lot of Captain Ignoramuses and I'm just all burnt out right now and I don't have the capacity. Or I do, and it's a great day for us both. But the power of the story is to represent us, especially when we're not in the room. And so the work, it's helping all of us be us when we do it right.
So well said. Yes. This cannot be a stronger foundation for all the conversations we're going to have today. Please give a big round of applause to our panel. Thank you guys so much. Outstanding.